Alright, hello and welcome to the screencast for MGD 2, or MGD 1 Week 2 for Pixel Perfect. Today we're going to be talking about the tasks that I completed for Milestone 2, which include the layout of the tutorial castle, the safe spot, the sprite being updated in its animations, game GUI being implemented, a go-to-meeting focus group with experts for Pixie's emotions, aggregation of the previous survey data that I had passed out for the level 1 and tutorial castle scripts, and a rewrite of those, and graphic adjustments to make sure that the game would work on the Nexus tablet that Nick was testing with. So first we're going to go into the data related stuff. I took all of the feedback that I got from the expert user group and posted it to news as an aggregated list. It was a very productive meeting, pretty good back and forth. We were able to kind of refine everybody's opinions on what they thought would make things look better and discuss how I could do them. I think that I'll be implementing just about every piece of feedback they gave next week during the updates. And then additionally, here is how I aggregated the script data feedback from the surveys. As you can see, I basically took every question. I gave the individual users numeric IDs to match between the surveys, so that way I wouldn't have any bias based off of who had specifically said what. So here's the feedback for level 1-1 and the feedback from the tutorial castle in a similar format. I went into the scripts and rewrote the scripts and left italicized comments for why I had done each change and justification from the feedback that the users gave me. So moving on from that, we'll go look at how the new tutorial level looks within Pixel Perfect, and I'll go over the different pieces that I worked on for this week. So here we can see the new game screen. The various buttons of the UI have been updated to have a sharper, crisper look. The speed track timer at the top is running. It would start immediately if you were doing a speed run through a level. It will stop for when Pixie dies or when a tutorial event happens. I've got the updated death tracker up here in the far right. Skull is now pixel style, as well as giving it kind of a standardized backing that matches the rest of everything else. And I also updated Pixie's unit icon in the far left, little white outline around Pixie's name to help it stand out, and changed the color of the star from a pink gradient to a dark blue gradient to a dark blue to light blue, based off feedback from users that it felt too intentionally feminine. So here we go. We're going to move through the actual tutorial level. The first thing you hopefully will notice is the parallaxing background that I've set up to give it more of a feeling of depth. There's also a lot more clutter in the scene. There's statues of the tutorial wizard, where he is kind of made an idealized macho statue of himself with muscles. There's some various bubbling pots and potions to get that kind of alchemy feel to the level. We're going to move forward and we'll encounter our first save spot, and we can see the changes in the animation, how it opens up now. I've added these almost Frankenstein-like lightning rods because Instructor Becker had kind of mentioned that maybe having some things that implied almost like a Frankenstein-y medieval feel to it, which I kind of agreed with. We've added this floating clone inside the tank, which will help imply that that's where the next clone comes from, as well as a particle effect system to give it some bubbles inside the tank. This drawbridge is new. It's essential to the tutorial because this is what the tutorial wizard will drop on Pixie to teach her about respawning. So here we get into kind of the jump initial mechanics. As you can see, there's kind of signs in the game now that are going to point the user through what he's expected or she's expected to do. These signs will probably be tied to whether you're playing on easy mode or not. If you're not playing on the easy mode, that will probably be turned off. So here's the first chance for Pixie to die, so I'm going to show how the death animation has been paused temporarily, so that way that the respawn of this save spots will work. So we'll intentionally drop Pixie in the lava here. And now the respawn tank will drain and a new Pixie will come out. And as it closes, a new clone Pixie will appear inside. And that is the basic gist of how the save spot works and what we were going for with this week with its design. Because if you remember the old version of the tutorial or the save spots, it was pretty much a clean, straight up and down cylinder. We've added a lot of this, the boiling potion to the side, the tank tubes on the side, as well as all the little potions, and these lightning rods. So here we have our first bit of gravity swap, and as if you haven't noticed, and you should probably notice in testing, is no matter where I click and the jump button, you can no longer toggle the gravity button. And that, I believe, was being caused by the additional space that was being generated by those flashing rings I had created to draw the user's attention to them for the first time. So when I do the tutorial rebuild, they'll be in a separate object and probably be arrows or some kind of particle effect, so that way it can't accidentally call the click for another button. So I've also updated Pixie's gravity swap. As you can see, she swaps gravity. Here it feels a lot more natural. She'll kind of hover where she's supposed to when she's doing it. If she's jumping in the air, there's no drastic jump and change in her positioning after the actual twirl, which was kind of a problem that was happening before. So here we get in kind of the gravity reinforcement mechanics, showing players about jumping on the ceiling and then swapping gravity from there. And there's not a sign at every physical position, but I kind of put them where I thought that a player might not understand the puzzle on the first try, so that way on easy or the tutorial mode they're kind of getting their hand held. And like I said, if you're not playing easy, the signs definitely won't be there, and then we can consider whether they'll be there in the actual levels beyond this point. So this is the area where Pixie would ideally fight a monster, or initially she'd fight the training dummy. And there would be a gate here to keep her from going out until she killed that monster, but because the monster's not going to be implemented until the tutorial level, I kind of left it out. I have an example of what these doors are going to look like here in a little bit. Here we have an early sprite for an enemy. This will be a room where Pixie can fight some actual enemies. The suggestion was made, why not make Pixie fight actual enemies at this point in the tutorial to help reinforce how it works. I thought that was a good idea, so I just wanted to dump one in here to give it some height and give me an idea of the room dimensions. So moving out of here will be what we consider the mechanic reinforcements. This should be the more difficult part of the tutorial. Whether we're going to put any monsters in here, I'm not 100% sure yet. I'm thinking maybe in these areas where there's just light jumping and not as much gravity swapping, there could be a monster for Pixie to have to fight in this area, and it would be fine. So, all this is pretty easy. Right here would probably be the most difficult part of the tutorial for the user. It's the first and only time they'll really have to do this, the jump mid-gravity swap, which is why there's a special sign for it. I've done it a bunch of times, and you can fall into the lava, which will cause you to respawn. So the timing on it's a little tight. Okay. If I get feedback from users that it is an issue, we might be able to move this platform up higher, and that will allow them to flip like they're supposed to, which is essentially what they just did there. So that was the basic mechanic reinforcement. For the buttons, we have a little area that teaches players about the push box. Right now there's no special animation on the push box while it's being pushed, and Pixie doesn't do anything while she is pushing it. But she can push it. We have a special script that makes the gravity version of it change, so that way it falls slightly faster than her, around the same speed as her. This is the first thing the player will kind of learn about push boxes, is that they aren't destroyed by spikes, but they can be used as a temporary platform to enable Pixie to jump over areas that she ordinarily wouldn't. So she won't be able to retrieve that push box, so we gave her a new one. But just because push boxes are destroyed by spikes Doesn't mean there's nothing in the scene that can kill them. So we have these saw blades, which are specially designed to kill both Pixie and the box. The box doesn't have its animation for destruction yet because that's planned for crunch time, but I did want it to be destroyed and kind of respawn in this initial tutorial to teach about what happens when you touch saw blades with the box. And the reason we need to get this box past here is in puzzles there will usually be an exit door, and this door can be triggered by Pixie because it's supposed to be weight based, but it's one of those puzzles where the object needs to stay on the switch in order for the door to stay out. And I did a bunch of testing with Pixie trying to run and get to this door before it would close all the way to make sure that users couldn't get through without the box, and they can't. So we're going to go ahead and drop the box on, and now we are able to go through. I'll get a little pop-up. This is where the tutorial wizard would come in and convince Pixie to leave the area, but because the tutorial events will be installed next week, we just have this simple: you've completed the tutorial level, please exit. It'll take you back to the main menu. So the layout's pretty simple. We'll look at the nuts and bolts of stuff before I end the video and show a emulation screen. And I'm going to turn off the game GUI just to be able to see inside the developmental build a little cleaner. Layout is pretty simple. In the game you can't see these empty game holders that I have that have events associated with them, but this is to help me keep track of where in the tutorial castle events are supposed to happen based off of how they were laid out in the paper prototype. In the paper prototype there are these big long colored sections that said things like gravity reinforcement, shooting. I wanted to have those in here too, so I had a marker of some sort when I come back next week for the events, and I could put them in the same place. Wasn't a lot of script development this week, but we'll show kind of what I did anyway. First and foremost was the parallax scrolling of the background, how the large pillars in the background, the two set, move at different speed to give the illusion of depth. It was a simple offset speed by the target position, which is Pixie. It'll find Pixie, tracks its start point, and then basically just adds or subtracts using a speed modifier off Pixie's position to offset the parallax. The save spot controller is similar to what it used to be. It needed a little additional work, mainly in controlling animation. It needed to be able to open the tank, as you can see here. And here we have, I'm trying to remember everything I did with it. So we have, this is an older part of the script to begin with. It turns on the red and green gems based off whether Pixie has encountered it for the first time or not. We've added some new public functions that the animator itself can call. The big thing that this does is at the end of the respawn animation, when the water has come down and that we want Pixie to reappear, all of the safe spot controllers can find Pixie and basically tell it that the death cycle is over, so that way she'll reappear on screen. And looking at Pixie's controller here, we've added some stuff in to kind of handle that stuff. Primarily in the death section, we track the last save spot that Pixie crossed during the respawn and tell it to begin its respawn animation, which basically just toggles the bool in the animator over here. You can see the public function sets it to true, so that way it'll begin. And then at the end of the Pixie death, we have control over some of the respawn sounds as well as the death sounds, which you should be able to hear on your testing tablets. You couldn't hear my test build because I didn't want it to override my voice. The other major work done with Pixie this week was I had feedback last week with the flipping gravity. The users felt it felt pretty good, but I was still having issues personally with Pixie clipping into ceilings or spikes. So I did a little work in here, temporarily making Pixie's gravity scale 0, so that way once she's in the flip animation she won't start going up or down. The big bit of work was finding out this specifically, how much to offset Pixie's sprite based off of the previous position she was in before the flip began, because the way it was flipping initially was just a complete negative transition. So if she was at +1, when I flipped her it would just be -1. Well, the problem is that the way the sprites work in Unity, they are center point a lot of times, is towards the bottom of the object, so that way they can be balanced on the ground, which meant when Pixie flipped, she would basically flip right along this axis instead of her center point. So we needed to determine where that center point was during her flip animation. Ironically, based off whether she was jumping in the air or not, is actually a different distance. If she was grounded, she needed to be flipped more than if she was in the air. So it took a little bit of testing. We got that figured out. Also, I worked on the push box script. Basically, the reason I needed to work on this is because initially, when Pixie could push the push boxes, they would slide quite a distance ahead of her because they did not have any ground friction. So I added some friction to them, but the problem is once you added the weight for friction, she pushed them really naturally and kind of slide away from her. But when you flipped them using the gravity swap, Pixie would fall at normal speed, and for whatever reason, the physics engine, I didn't understand this, but for whatever reason, something with a higher ground friction moves slowly through the air, so the box would move really slowly, and it looked really unnatural, and I had to figure out what I was going to do with that. So what I did basically with the push boxes is I went into the push boxes and I created a script similar to how Pixie determines whether she's grounded or not. Give me a moment and I will open up or show an example of the push box up close. Here it is. So on the push box, you can see it's got a collider. It has this linear drag and its mass turned up. The linear drag was what was causing it to move really slowly through the air. We also have this little empty game object that's called the push box ground check. And I use a physics 2D overlap similar to what I use for Pixie to determine whether it's grounded or not. So once you flip the box and it gets into the air and it's not grounded, I temporarily switch its drag to 0, so that way it'll fall at the same speed as Pixie. As soon as it hits the ground or hits the ceiling, it goes back up to 6 here, so that way it'll be pushed along the ground without sliding when Pixie's pushing, and it feels like it's got a little weight to it when she's pushing it. Because I added that box, that ground check, I had to temporarily shift the ground check location to move it from the top into the bottom. Just a quick, simple flip. Nothing too difficult. And the other thing that needed to be done really this week in terms of the tutorial castle was I needed to add or extend the existing kill object script so that way the saws could kill the boxes. It was basically just added a simple bool that, this object can kill boxes. If it can kill boxes and it encounters a box, destroy the box. It didn't need anything special for if it hit Pixie because those objects could always kill Pixie. And looking at the tasks, we've discussed the tutorial castle layout. I showed you the save sprite and its animation working properly. Through the process of playing it, I should have shown you all the gameplay, GUI, and implementation. We discussed how I aggregated the GMT feedback, and my plans to move forward is basically to follow all the good feedback I got from the experts. I showed you how I collected the survey data. The teachers have seen the script rewrites with the Gestalt approach to the to those scripts. The graphic correction with the Nexus testing I cannot really show you in Unity. I can describe the issues that I had, which was it seems that there was an issue with the original version of Unity that I was using. Had to have been some kind of bug. I was seeing a lot of reports that people were having trouble with it as well. So at Nick's suggestion, I went ahead and upgraded to the most recent version of Unity. I changed my compression rate and in the Android building from default to ETC2, which was another suggestion I had gotten on the internet. One of those two steps seems to have fixed Nick's problem with seeing black graphics. He hasn't reported seeing them to me again since that build I sent him with them fixed. On my end, I was seeing what I call patchwork on the tablet. I've seen you guys express that you don't necessarily know what patchworking meant. On my tablet, occasionally, I can show you really quickly, I would see a situation where there would be 2 pixels next to one another, and for whatever reason, one would appear slightly darker than the other one compared to this. And it would be obvious. There would be this patchwork of different sprites, and initially I thought it was because the sprites physically had different color settings like I just did. Went through and checked all of them. Turned out that wasn't the case. So I basically had to play on the tablet on one hand and go through the tutorial level on the other hand, looking for where the patchworking happened and clicking on the objects and trying to determine what was different between their import settings. It turned out that Most of them were set to true color, which gives the nice color quality of what I want compared to what I had originally done in Photoshop. And some of them were set to compressed, which for whatever reason was giving them a slightly darker sheen. And that covers basically what I did for the graphic Nexus testing, as well as trying to fix things for the Shield. I'll do a test video next of me playing the game in an emulated state. Unfortunately, I left my Shield at work, so I'll do my third screen on Monday and post that video then.